Hi everyone, welcome back to Live Like a Philosopher and the second lecture of our course. In this lecture, we continue our introductory unit by looking at Socrates in more depth. One of the things we'll focus on here is the way Plato presents the heroic nature of Socrates in the Apology. We'll also return to the Socratic method of elenchus, or refutation, which we discussed a bit in our last lecture. We'll see that method put into action twice. First, in the Apology, in this video, and then in the next video in another famous Platonic dialogue, the Symposium. In our lecture last week, we covered Plato's Apology and Socrates' defense speech in that text, where he argues against the charges brought against him by Meletus and others who accuse him of impiety and corrupting the youth. We saw how Socrates in the Apology fails to succeed in convincing the Athenian jury of his innocence. We didn't, however, discuss what happens after the events of the Apology. We noted that the Athenians eventually sentenced Socrates to death, but do they follow through with the verdict? Or does Socrates find a daring way to escape from prison and avoid his sentence? Well, in fact, Socrates is given the opportunity to escape from prison in another Platonic dialogue, where one of his friends, Crito, comes to visit him in jail. In this work, Crito explains how he and some other friends have managed to bribe the jailer and set up plans to spirit Socrates away out of jail and out of Athens to safety. But Socrates refuses, and in the rest of this dialogue, called the Crito, he explains why he believes it would be wrong and, in fact, unjust for him to escape Athens and to avoid the death penalty, even though he also believes the Athenians were wrong to find him guilty. In addition to the Crito, Plato writes another famous dialogue, the Phaedo, about Socrates' last day in jail with a group of companions. This dialogue movingly depicts the distress and sorrow that all of Socrates' friends feel when they know they'll soon lose him. Socrates devotes all of the text to explaining why they have no reason to feel upset because he'll continue to live on in some way. And at the end of this dialogue, Plato depicts Socrates drinking the cup of hemlock that contains the poison that puts him to death. The text closes with the narrator saying, "Such was the end of our comrade, a man who we would say was of all those we have known the best and also the wisest and the most just." This scene, Socrates on his deathbed calmly accepting his fate and drinking the hemlock, is one of the most famous in all of antiquity. On the left here you'll see the scene depicted powerfully in a painting by Jean-Louis David in the 18th century. What this representation and Plato's portrayal of Socrates in the Phaedo show us is a new sort of heroism in the Greek world. Plato deliberately asks us, as readers, to consider the kind of person Socrates was in life and in death. The following passage from the Apology, where Socrates addresses the jury during his trial, makes clear the essence of his heroism. He imagines here a person accusing him of wasting his life. "Someone might say," he remarks, "Are you not ashamed, Socrates, to have followed the kind of occupation that has led to your being now in danger of death?" In a culture like ancient Athens, where wealth, military might, and political status were all highly valued, Socrates must have been seen as a truly bizarre figure for his commitment to philosophy, to the point that he was even willing to die for it. But Socrates' response to his imagined accuser in this passage is striking. "I should be right to reply to him," he says. "You're wrong if you think that a man who is any good at all should take into account the risk of life or death. He should look to this only in his actions, whether what he does is right or wrong, whether he is acting like a good or a bad man. According to your view, all the heroes who died at Troy were inferior people, especially the son of Thetis, who was so contemptuous of danger compared with disgrace." Socrates here defies conventional wisdom by declaring that true heroism isn't about avoiding death, but about living a life of integrity. It's not the length of your life that's most important, but whether you've lived a good life. What's striking is the radical redefinition of heroism that he's asking his audience and us to consider. He juxtaposes his own form of heroism with that of the heroes of Troy, particularly Achilles, the son of Thetis. Achilles was celebrated in Greek mythology for his physical bravery, whereas Socrates in this passage champions a different kind of courage, a courage grounded in ethical principles. Socrates is basically suggesting here that the worth of one's actions should not be judged by their consequences, even if those consequences include death. Instead, the worth lies in the goodness of the action itself. The form of heroism Socrates displays may not win wars, but it paves the way for a life that's ethical and well-lived. A philosophical life, as he thinks of it. Plato seems to be indirectly asking us, what kind of heroism is most needed in society? Is it the physical valor celebrated in epic tales, or this new kind of ethical courage that Socrates embodies? Socrates continues addressing the Athenian jury in this part of the Apology by expanding on the analogy between service in wartime and his work as a philosopher. Wherever a man has taken a position that he believes to be best, he says, or has been placed by his commander, there he must, I think, remain and face danger, without a thought for death or anything else rather than disgrace. Socrates then goes on to compare the service he carried out while on military campaigns, when he was drafted to fight in various wars for Athens, and the service he believes he provides others by practicing philosophy. It would have been a dreadful way to behave, he says, if, during these battles at Potidaea, Amphipolis, and Delium, I had, at the risk of death, like anyone else, remained at my post, where those you elected to command had ordered me, and then, when the god ordered me, as I thought and believed, to live the life of a philosopher, to examine myself and others, I had abandoned my post for fear of death or anything else. This passage introduces the idea of orienting one's life around a higher command or set of principles than the fear of death. Notice how Plato interestingly has Socrates tweak the military idea of a commander in living a philosophical life. For Socrates, this is not a commander in wartime, but a divine imperative to examine himself and others. Now, it's not clear how exactly Socrates conceives of the god who urges him to practice philosophy, but it's interesting to see how he compares his military service with his life's work. In both cases, he argues, he must remain where he believes he should, facing danger and potential death without flinching. The message here is striking. True courage involves standing your ground, not just in the face of physical danger, but also when your moral convictions are put under pressure or stress. This is a call to intellectual bravery, to a courage that persists in the face of social or existential threats. From these passages, we can see the kind of hero Socrates was for Plato, the kind who didn't show his heroism only on the battlefield, but in everyday social spaces like the Athenian marketplace, where he spent most of his life questioning others and engaging them in philosophical discussion. The marketplace, or the Greek agora, was Athens' public square, where everyone from every walk of life turned up to trade and chat, to engage in friendly conversation, consider matters of mutual interest, and participate in politics. In this space, Socrates' kind of heroism wasn't displayed in his martial valor, but in his intellectual and ethical courage, in his daring to question conventional wisdom and live a life of integrity and conscience. In a world that prioritized external markers of success like trophies, reputation, and material prosperity, Socrates' heroism lay in prioritizing his internal character. And in representing the life of Socrates in this way, Plato suggests here that the real battleground in our lives lies within. You can read the Apology in this sense as a call for us to live like Socrates, to have the courage to question what's unquestioned by examining accepted ways of thinking and our own assumptions, facing our own ignorance, and developing a more ethical character, no matter the external cost. As a result of this, the traditional Greek character strengths or virtues that would have been familiar in ancient Athens, wisdom, courage, moderation, and justice, all need to be rethought in light of Socrates' example. Living well on this view requires a new kind of wisdom, a new kind of courage and moderation and justice. We'll be exploring Plato's new way of thinking about virtue in more detail over the next few weeks. But as we move forward in this course, let's keep the Socratic conception of heroism in mind. It will be a touchstone for many of the ideas that we'll explore together. Now, as we continue to consider the figure of Socrates, it's important not just to observe what he says about the practice of philosophy, but to see the practice in action. This leads us back to Socrates' use of the elenchus, his distinctive method of inquiry which we're introduced to in Lecture 1. And what better way to understand this method than by looking at an example? We'll focus here on a case study from the Apology, which you should have read at this point, where Socrates has a famous exchange with Meletus, his principal accuser during his trial. To set the stage, remember that two charges were brought against Socrates historically: corrupting the youth and impiety. Meletus in the Apology is one of the individuals who brings these accusations against Socrates, and here we'll look at the accusation of impiety to see how Socrates refutes it. Socrates cross-examines Meletus in this exchange, and his use of the elenchus isn't just a defense tactic, it's a demonstration of his commitment to philosophy. Plato seems to be suggesting that Socrates uses his court appearance as an opportunity to engage in the philosophical inquiry for which he was put on trial in the first place. What we'll do here is list step by step a few key questions that Socrates asks Meletus, and then put them together to see how each step involves Meletus making a specific claim that results in him refuting himself. Alright, so first we have this quote from 27b to 27c in the Apology. Socrates asks, "Does any man, Meletus, believe in human activities who does not believe in humans? Does any man who does not believe in horses believe in horsemen's activities? Or in flute-playing activities but not in flute players? Does any man believe in spiritual activities who does not believe in spirits?" Meletus responds that no one does. Then Socrates asks, "Now you say that I believe in spiritual things and teach about them, whether new or old, but at any rate spiritual things according to what you say. And to this you have sworn in your deposition. But if I believe in spiritual things, I must quite inevitably believe in spirits." Socrates then goes on to say, "Then since I do believe in spirits, as you admit, if spirits are gods, this is what I mean when I say you speak in riddles and in jest, as you state that I do not believe in gods, and then again that I do, since I do believe in spirits. If, on the other hand, the spirits are children of the gods, what man would believe children of the gods to exist, but not gods?" So here we see a series of quotes. And our task in understanding how the Socratic elenchus works is to investigate carefully what Socrates and Meletus agree to at each step, so that when we put all these steps together, we can see how Meletus has contradicted himself. Let's begin then by focusing on this first step at 27b to c. Socrates is calling attention to a bunch of examples of different activities here, and from these examples, he's trying to draw an inference, a general claim that captures the point he's making with all of the examples. The general claim, the general principle, is that if a person believes in activities associated with X, then they believe in X. This principle applies to flute-playing activities, it applies to activities associated with horses, and, importantly for this argument, it also applies to spiritual activities. Now let's look at this next quote at 27c. Socrates continues to cross-examine Meletus and asks him this: "You say that I believe in spiritual things and teach about them, whether new or old. But at any rate spiritual things according to what you say. And to this you have sworn in your deposition. But if I believe in spiritual things, I must quite inevitably believe in spirits." Here we have just two sentences, but argumentatively Socrates is doing a number of different things. And it's important, again, if we're trying to understand how Meletus is refuted, to break down this quote into its more specific claims. Since Meletus agrees to everything that's said, the argument being put together doesn't belong primarily to Socrates. It's a line of inquiry designed most of all to expose Meletus's views. This quote then should really be divided up into three different claims. Socrates gets Meletus to agree with him in two, that if a person believes in spiritual activities, then they believe in spirits. Socrates then points out in three that Meletus in his own deposition has stated that Socrates believes in spiritual activities. But if that's right, it means that Socrates has to believe in spirits. So 4 here is a little sub-conclusion that follows from 1, 2, and 3. By Meletus' own admission, Socrates has to believe in spirits because he believes in spiritual activities. Let's move on then to this next quote, where Socrates brings everything home to try and show Meletus how he's contradicted himself. Socrates asks, well, since you say that I believe in spirits, if spirits are gods, this is what I mean when I say that you speak in riddles and in jest, as you state that I do not believe in gods, and then again that I do, since I do believe in spirits. Here, Socrates is in the process of exploring 2 different options in considering the nature of spirits. He first puts forward the option, let's imagine that spirits are gods. Well, if that's the case, then since from 4 Socrates believes in spirits, then Socrates has to believe in gods. Socrates next explores another option in considering the nature of spirits. If, on the other hand, he asks, spirits are not gods themselves but children of the gods, well, still, what man would believe that children of the gods exist but not gods? Here then, in 6, Socrates is essentially making the point that even if spirits are not gods but children of the gods, it still has to follow that Socrates believes in gods, because we saw, again in 4, that Socrates believes in spirits. And if you believe in spirits and spirits are the children of gods, then you have to believe in the existence of gods. So at this point, what Socrates has essentially done is show Meletus that 5 and 6 contradict his initial claim, that Socrates does not believe in the gods at all. And through this chain of reasoning that Socrates uses in the text, we can see that it's not really Socrates who has contradicted Meletus, because Meletus, after all, has agreed with each of these different claims. It's Meletus who has refuted himself. Socrates has asked these questions in order to understand in a bit more depth what it is exactly that Meletus is saying. And it's turned out, by excavating what Meletus believes, that Meletus has contradicted himself. What we see here then, in conducting this little exercise in analyzing a Socratic elenchus, is how we can take a series of quotes that occur in a Platonic dialogue, and we can turn these quotes into a series of claims that Socrates gets his interlocutors, his discussion partners, to agree to as part of a chain of reasoning. But again, he's not forcing them, he's not coercing them to say these things. These are actually beliefs that, upon reflection, his interlocutor, Meletus in this case, actually believes himself. And as a result, Meletus refutes himself. This concludes the first part of Lecture 2. What we've done here is consider the new kind of heroism that Socrates displays and that Plato asks us to consider in the Apology. It's a kind of heroism that requires that we rethink what true wisdom, courage, moderation, and justice are. And we've also seen Socrates' intellectual courage in action by analyzing an example of the Socratic elenchus in his refutation of Meletus in the Apology. In the next part of this second lecture, we'll do this exercise again by looking at excerpts from another Platonic dialogue, the Symposium.